The Switch 2 released about a week ago, and well, its launch hasn't been without issues, to put it mildly. The release has been mired with controversy about its price, the pricing of its software, and concerns about the hardware itself. But are those concerns justified? Is the Switch 2 doomed to be seen as an overpriced Switch? Are the games outrageously priced? And overall, is the Nintendo Switch 2 worth $450 or $630 Canadian? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like in this video and subscribe. And let's answer this question together. So first off, let's talk hardware. And the news is a mixed bag, as is tradition with Nintendo. The good news is that the Switch 2 is powered by a custom NVIDIA SoC that's much more powerful than the Tegra X1 found in the Switch 1. Meaning that from a hardware perspective, it's more likely to get third-party titles that are less cut down than what is currently found on the Switch 1. It also means the console is likely to get long-term support for its lifespan, assuming the sales are good, of course. The bad news is that the console isn't as powerful as the PS5 or Xbox Series X, so it's likely that third-party games will be cut down on the Switch 2 compared to those platforms. Personally, I don't mind that, as the Switch 2 is using significantly less power than those consoles, and is a handheld so you can take your games on the road with you in a way that you can't with a PlayStation or an Xbox. It also has 12 GB of RAM, at least 9 of which is usable by games, so RAM shouldn't be an issue for as long as the Xbox Series S is being supported, which is quite nice to see. Docked mode also supports a 120 frames per second up to 1440p resolution, with a maximum of 4K at 60. What this means is that you'll finally be able to take advantage of your 1440p or 4K TVs or monitors and enjoy that sweet, sweet detail. The dock itself is essentially the OLED dock in terms of ports, and has a built-in fan to keep the console cool. Overall, the dock is still the dock, which I'm fine with. There wasn't a lot wrong with it in Switch 1, and I'm happy to see Nintendo not fixing what isn't broken. However, I will recommend that everyone gets a screen protector for their consoles just in case there are issues with the dock scratching screens. And realistically, it's just best practice to do that in general. The peripherals themselves seem to be solid enough. Although I haven't had a chance to use the Switch 2 Pro controller myself, I have heard that the D-pad issues with the Switch 1 Pro controller have been solved for the most part. And the Joy-Con 2s are larger, so those of us with larger hands should have an easier time with them. And they also attach magnetically, so we won't be able to put the Joy-Cons on backwards and then have a hard time taking them off again. Or was that just me that did that at one point? You can also use the Joy-Con 2s in mouse mode, which makes shooting games more like they are in PC, and is honestly pretty good for what it is in my experience. Even if I would personally prefer an actual mouse, just because of the ergonomics of it all. Speaking of Switch 1 accessories, Switch 1 Pro controllers and Joy-Cons are compatible with Nintendo Switch 2, although you won't be able to charge the latter on the console itself. This was expected, and if you're selling your Switch, you can get some Joy-Con chargers and you should be fine for a while. However, the Switch 1 dock and AC adapters aren't compatible, and while that is disappointing, it is understandable given the design and features of the Switch 2 dock. The screen itself is a 7.9-inch 1080p LCD panel featuring HDR10 support and variable refresh rate up to 120Hz, which is a huge deal because you'll finally be playing Switch games at 120 FPS when Nintendo or third parties support that, such as with Metroid Prime 4. The screen looks excellent, and you almost forget that it's an LCD panel, which is really impressive. I'm really looking forward to being able to play my games on the go on this screen, and it's certainly far better than the one on the Steam Deck. The handheld situation is further improved by the USB-C port on top of the console, which means that I can plug it in on the go and not be bothered by the charging cable as much. The battery is also expected to last around 2 to 6.5 hours depending on what you're playing, which is in line with my testing that I will now talk about. I had the chance to take the Switch 2 with me on a road trip this past weekend, and I got to test the battery out of that. With the screen brightness set to auto and Bluetooth headphones connected, I experienced a 71% drop in battery from 100% to 29% over 2 hours and 35 minutes of gaming in Mario Kart World, including putting the console to sleep and waking it up as we stopped at Timmy's and got double doubles. Once we got where we were going, I recharged my Switch to 91% and played for the same amount of time on the way home. And the battery playing Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, which as of the time of recording has not received a Switch 2 patch, dropped to 34%, only a 57% drop. Overall, the One Direction playing World resulted in roughly a 0.46% battery consumption per minute of gaming on average, while the Xenoblade run resulted in a 0.37% battery consumption per minute on average. I also, for the sake of academic and scientific rigor, retested with the brightness set to roughly 50% to confirm, since auto brightness can cause weird battery issues, and had similar enough results, 0.48% per minute for World, and virtually identical performance for Xenoblade X, that I am confident in saying that the Switch games that haven't received a Switch 2 upgrade will yield better battery life. However, there have been reports that there are some weirdnesses with the battery, so you will definitely want to confirm this on your end as well, and if you find something different, please let me know with the game, and we'll see what we can do to get a bit of a compendium together of sorts. In terms of storage and expansion, Switch 2 has a 256GB internal drive, some of which is going to be used by the operating system. While 256GB is definitely an improvement over the 32 and 64 found in the Nintendo Switch and the Switch OLED, I think this should have been 512 as a way to let more games be installed in the system, especially now that game keycards are becoming more common. More on that later. Happily, the storage can once again be expanded with a microSD express card, but to do that you'll need to get a card of the right kind, which can be tricky to do given the absolute state of the microSD card world. Personally, I got a 256GB card from Nintendo since it's going to give me some breathing room on the console until microSD express card prices can come down and more storage becomes cheaper in a few years. I also tend to get my games physically, so the need for my internal storage is far less than it could otherwise be. Overall, the build quality is really good too. It's not Apple, but it's likely to last you a long time if you take care of it and don't throw it down some stairs. It still feels good in the hand. It doesn't really feel like Nintendo cheaped out anywhere, which is nice. There's really not much to say here. The quality is just good. With that in mind, I'm now ready to give a score on hardware. While the hardware itself is not the most powerful out there, it is competent and third-party titles should be playable for years to come. While the lack of storage is an issue, it can be remedied by a microSD express card, even if those are relatively expensive for the moment. Build quality is good too, which is in line for Nintendo. I therefore award the Switch 2 a 3 out of 4 on hardware because while it is powerful, it definitely could be made more powerful given its year of release. With that done, let's talk software. In terms of software, it's the same old user interface as Nintendo Switch 1, with some minor changes that the average user should get used to pretty quickly. Based on the Switch 1, we already know that the OS that powers the Switch is very stable, with very few bugs, and is relatively light to boot. The console is quite responsive, although I will say when I wait the console, it can take a few seconds for the buttons on the Joy-Cons to respond and for me to get in, but after that, it's fine. Overall, it runs games well, it gets out of your way, and is generally pleasant to use. The eShop feels slick and loads quite fast. I'm very impressed by it and find myself browsing it from time to time rather than actively avoiding it like I did on the Switch 1. The Nintendo Switch Online app also feels quite good. Overall, this is a great example of the horsepower of the console shining through, and it's just nice to have a more usable experience on Switch 2. Of course, the real party piece of the Switch 2 OS is Game Chat, which I'm pleased to report works quite well, or at least well enough. That having been said, well, the audio works great, and so does the green screen effect, mostly. any gameplay being displayed in your background is going to run quite badly. Obviously, I don't think this will be replacing Discord on its own, and you can only game chat with friends that you've connected to on your Nintendo Switch, so it is only a gimmick. But what's wrong with a gimmick? Nothing. In terms of security, Nintendo has gone out of their way to lock this console down, and lock it down hard. While some things have been made to work, anything that works to hack Switch 1 or dump Switch 1 games or make them run on Switch 1 isn't going to work here. Nor has any way to soft mod Switch 2 been discovered as of the time of recording. What this means is that, at least for the first few years of its life, we're unlikely to get Switch 2 exclusive leaking early like we saw with Switch 1. The same thing also goes for any working emulators. Personally, even as someone who is pro-emulation, I think this is a good thing. Switch 2 will hopefully go on unmodded for the first few years of its life, and that's probably for the best. Eventually, hacks are going to be needed to preserve the console exclusives, but that's a long ways away, and in the meantime, we should just enjoy them. Of course, the downside of the existing OS is a lack of themes, which continues here. Personally, the lack of themes is an issue, and it's one I hope Nintendo rectifies quickly, as I want something other than light and dark mode after 8+ years. With that done, I'm now ready to give a score on software. The Switch 2 OS is an excellent experience overall, even if the console could do with some more customization options. It's secure, it's fast, and it's unintrusive to the user. I therefore awarded a score of 3.5 out of 4, losing marks only for the lack of themes. If they ever do add themes beyond dark mode though, this score should be considered a 4 out of 4. With software done, let's talk company reputation. Now, Nintendo's reputation when it comes to hardware repairs is actually pretty good, with a few caveats. Personally, I've had to send in Joy-Cons, a dock, and a Pro Controller into Nintendo for repair, and I've generally had a great experience doing so. Their customer service is friendly, efficient, and I've never had an issue with them. When I sent one of my Pro Controllers in because it was drifting, it was around 2 weeks between the time I placed the support call to getting what I suspect was a new Pro Controller back, which is really good. They also repaired my drifting Joy-Cons for free, but as a note, that program was only established after lawsuits were filed, and it seems Joy-Con 2s will also be repaired for free in some regions as of the time of recording. Lastly, the only not so good experience I've had with Nintendo Repair was when they kept trying and failing to repair one of my Switch docks, but ultimately offered to send me a new one without my asking for it after the third failed repair. Then they tried to renege on that after I'd sent my dock in to get it replaced. I did ultimately get the new dock though after I called them and had to speak to a supervisor about it, who I suspect just wanted to confirm the problems on my end. And the dock was delivered without further issues. However, I suspect that last one was a fluke, as with that one part of the attempted repair of my dock excluded, they've always been excellent in my experience. Really, I've had more issues with the repairs themselves than the customer support preventing me from getting them, which does happen from time to time with some companies. I also rarely hear stories of Nintendo being difficult about getting support and repairs done. In terms of software, the only issue I know exists is trying to return eShop purchases, but that can be avoided if you're careful and have read reviews beforehand. And with the exception of Steam, all the major players can be annoying about it. I'm now ready to give a score on company reputation. Overall, while Nintendo isn't Steam when it comes to support, they're still quite good, and will do their best to help you even if they sometimes mess up. I therefore award Nintendo a score of 3.5 out of 4, only losing marks for the Joy-Con debacle. With that done, let's talk about repairability and upgradability. Unfortunately, this is an area where the Switch 2 falls down pretty hard. iFixit, as of the time of recording, has given the Switch 2 a 3 out of 10 in terms of repairability, citing concerns with the designs of the internals, in particular the solder components and a glued-in battery. The former is understandable, at least, given the thinness of the console, but personally I think pull tabs should have been used for the battery, and I'm very surprised they weren't. However, the dock does seem to be better designed in that respect. which is good. The AC adapter is also modular with a USB-C charge cable rather than having it all together like the Switch 1 does, which is a huge win to keep the charging brick out of the landfill as the cables wear out, which is awesome to see for sustainability. Where you might have hope is repairing and upgrading the Joy-Cons and other accessories, but even there, I wouldn't hold my breath for the first while of the lifespan of the console. But the Switch 2 is very likely to be locked down hard in terms of upgrading any of the internal components, like, for example, that 256 gigs of storage. I am now ready to give a score here. Overall, the Switch 2, as of the time of recording, isn't very repairable for the most part, but in fairness to Nintendo, some gains have been made. I therefore award a score of 1.5 out of 4. With the understanding that as third parties figure out how to make repairs happen and other upgrades happen, this will rise to a 2 or maybe even beyond. Now, let's talk library. And I'm just going to cut to the point here, it's a 4 out of 4. The Switch 2 is almost fully backwards compatible with Switch 1 titles, only losing compatibility to games requiring Labo, like the Labo Toy-Con 04 VR kit, which I bet you didn't know existed, because I certainly didn't before this review. Joy-Con 1 only accessories like Ring Fit Adventure, or games that aren't yet working on the translation layer Nintendo is using, like Abema, as of the time of recording. Of course, as time goes on, I expect this list to shrink substantially, especially as publishers update their games to work on Switch 2. In addition, Switch 2 editions of some games are being developed and released. Some of these updates are going to increase the resolution and frame rate, such as the update for The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Others are going to add minor features on top of that, such as the updates for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And the last kind adds full-blown DLC, such as the update for Kirby and the Forgotten Land. These Switch 2 editions can range in price from being free if there's no new content to $10 US or $15 Canadian if minor content is being added, or $20 US or $30 Canadian if full-blown DLC is present. Personally, I actually think these editions are priced reasonably for the content that they add, and even just frame rate enhancements will breathe new life into some games, like Tears of the Kingdom. I expect Nintendo and third parties will be making these editions for years to come, and as a foreshadow, these packs are arguably the most reasonably priced part of the Switch 2. Of course, non-upgraded games will also see some increases in performance, but likely not to the same degree as Switch 2 editions. To find out what the difference is, I've prepared quite a simple test. On your screen right now are 3 versions of Tears of the Kingdom. One running on Switch 1 via GameCard, one running on Citron on my Steam Deck via the SSD with the emulator set to docked and high, and one running on the Switch 2 via the Switch 1 GameCard with the upgrade pack. And what we will now do, as I continue on through this review, is simply compare their performance by doing a test run that I made as similar as possible. So we'll take a look at that.
Hi guys, editing JP here. My script was actually way off on this, even though it shouldn't have been. I'm not sure why it was, but just as a correction that you won't even see because I got it wrong. Overall, Switch 2 is consistently reliably the best, both in terms of loading times and performance. Switch 1 and Citron trade blows when Citron's running on the SSD in terms of loading time, but Switch 1 is the clear winner on performance. And the Citron micro SD card down in the corner there is just sad. Overall, am actually quite surprised about that. I was expecting the SSD to win out overall in terms of loading times. I suspect it's something to do with either the emulator itself or the fact that TOTK Optimizer may or may not be working on this run. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna let recording me head back to the review now. Toodles.
So with that done, and a 4 out of 4 rating already locked in, it's time to talk about price. And it's time for the rest of you, some people here, before they leave angry comments, to put the pitchforks away. Because I know it's coming. Because the pricing of this console, and I hope you're sitting down for this, is $450 US or $630 Canadian. And that will get you the console, an AC adapter, 2 Joy-Con 2s, the dock, a grip for the Joy-Con 2s that doesn't charge, and an HDMI cable that is presumably at least HDMI 2.0 so we can do 4K at 60. $500 US or $700 Canadian gets you all of that and a digital copy of Mario Kart World. To figure out whether this is a good deal, I set myself a very simple challenge. Given $630 Canadian, what else could I buy that would be similar to the Switch 2, both in terms of form factor and overall performance? And here's what I came up with. And keep in mind, everything I came up with here, I'm treating at full price. 256GB LCD Steam Deck for $500. That will get me, comes with an AC adapter and a carrying case. A JSO docking station, that costs $70. An HDMI cable, and a 512GB microSD card. That costs $44 right now as of the time of recording. That combo, at full price, costs $627 Canadian, and will play almost everything from Nintendo via emulator. It'll hook up to your TV. That dock will have better I/O than the Switch 2 dock. You will of course have access to the entire Steam library, which of course also means better sales. You will have more storage than the Switch 2 because of the microSD card. It already comes with a carrying case, is compatible with a wide variety of controllers including mouse and keyboard, and is a PC, so you can use it for things besides console gaming. Yes, you're now making compromises on the screen, and it is thicker than the Switch 2, but overall, in my view, it's definitely a better deal for getting into gaming. The other problem I noticed is that Nintendo went with an LCD screen in the Switch 2 rather than an OLED. Now this tells me one of 3 things. Number 1, they tried to get an OLED in here and couldn't make it work with the price. And if they couldn't, I shudder to think what it might have been without that. Number 2, they're saving it for an OLED revision in a few years down the line. Or 3, they just never considered it. And I don't actually think number 3 is a possibility. So, and I think personally the most likely outcome is that second one, that they're saving it for an OLED at some point. And that tells me in 4 years or so, 2029, maybe earlier, maybe later, Nintendo's going to come out with a version of the Switch 2 with an OLED screen and presumably improved components. So why would you get this console now? The answer to that is that much though I hate to say it, and I know this is going to get someone in the comments angry, this price may be about as low as the Switch 2 gets. There's a number of reasons for this, most notably the current economic situation in the United States with regards to tariffs, but it is unlikely the price of the Switch 2 will remain at that $450 or $630 depending on where you are throughout its lifetime, and will have to go up either as a result of tariffs or because of other issues. It's also likely that the Switch 2 OLED, if I had to make a guess, is probably going to cost about as much as the bundle does now, if history is any indication. Now, admittedly, it's also possible that the price could come down, but I regard it as very unlikely if people are buying it at the current price. And given as of the time of recording, it's sold at 3.5 million units in 4 days, and it's probably over 4 now, a week in. People are buying it. However, where you really get hurt is on the game prices. Mario Kart World, the flagship launch title for this console, to get it physically, cost $80 US, or $110 Canadian. These are, prima facie, too high. And while World could be an exception, a game like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Switch 2 Edition is also 100 Canadian or 70 US and doesn't come with its DLC, which I'm sorry is inexcusable. It is greedy, and I highly recommend finding the Switch 1 version on sale and buying the upgrade pack. And that applies to any and all Switch 1 games enhanced to run on Switch 2. Other Switch 2 games like the new Donkey Kong are $70 US or 100 Canadian. So I suspect that is probably the default price, with an additional 10 added on for S-tier franchises like Mario Kart, probably 3D Mario, and any new Zelda games. Funnily enough, the only reasonable pricing is on, other than those Switch 2 upgrades, is on accessories like the Pro Controller and the Joy-Con 2s. Yes, they have gone up in price, but I don't regard them as being egregious in the way that the console and the games are. And I'd recommend replacing your Pro Controllers with Pro Controllers 2s as they get older and start failing. Someone is going to say, well, why would you get all that when you can get the bundle? Because the bundle is a better deal. And to those people I say, yes, kind of. You can save $30 in the US, or $40 if you're in Canada, getting the Mario Kart World bundle rather than buying all the products separately. But the bundle is digital, so you can't resell it the way that you would a physical copy. Is that worth the savings to you? Personally, I did get the bundle, but only because my local EB Games refused to let me buy them separately the night of, which is fair enough. I did kind of pre-order the bundle, but yeah, there's a long story short, they wouldn't let me do it, so I got the bundle and saved $40. Cool. To that end, I am now ready to give a score on price. Now let's be clear. The pricing is atrocious for the most part. However, there is a tiny chance, and by a tiny chance I mean I'd say give it a 25%. It's not tiny, but whatever. 25% chance that it becomes the cheapest current gen platform once the PS6 and the Xbox, whatever they decided to call it this time, come out in the next couple years. And it could be cheaper than the Steam Deck 2 when it releases. The price proposition is also going to get better as more games are revealed and released for it. However, I must evaluate it today and not in 2 to 3 years. And to that end, I awarded a score of 2 out of 4 in price. The bundle is clearly a better deal than the console itself, but better does not equal good. And there's no way to know if or when it will be back, or if that'll be in the near future. I am also knocking it for game pricing, in particular the absolute scandal of not including the DLC in the Switch 2 edition of Breath of the Wild. An 8-year-old game. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna harp on this. Like, go on Steam right now, go find something that was released in 2017 with DLC. I guarantee you can find that thing on sale for at least 50 to 60% off. The only exception that might be there is a FromSoft game. And even then, the Dark Souls games go on sale for 50% off sometimes. So, anyway, in conclusion, that's that. The Switch 2 scores 17.5 points out of a possible 24, or, rounding up, about a 7.5 out of 10. So, to answer our question, is the Switch 2 worth $450 US or $630 Canadian? And, well, kind of? Question mark? I think if you're someone who only owns a Switch 1, has no interest in other consoles or PCs, then yes. Yes, it is. If you're someone like me, who plays Nintendo games, but also has a Steam Deck or other form of PC, then I'd also say it's worth it. At least for a while. You know, in 4 years, once the OLED comes out and you can swing it, then I'd say go for that. If you're someone who really values that handheld form factor, the Switch 2 is such a clear upgrade over the Switch 1 in that respect, from that it's not even funny, then yes, it's worth it. However, and again, the console is brand new. It's very likely to be supported for 7 to 8 years. And if you can swing the money right now, go for it. There are worse stuff and things in the gaming world you can spend your money on. However, if you are the type of player looking to get into Nintendo games, it's going to be a harder sell. And I guess if you truly cared about that 1440p or 4K output, then yeah. But if you don't, the Switch 1 is going to be supported through at least 2026, even if it isn't going to get every new first-party Nintendo game. So, give Switch 1 a shot first, and then decide if you want to get the Switch 2. Additionally, I would not recommend the Switch 2 to anyone who plays once a week with the kids or something similar to that. Instead, go with the Switch 1, save yourself some money. I'm also making a recommendation to get the Switch 1 version of physical games, and then upgrading as needed to save yourself some money. And if you decide that it's not worth the money and you want to wait, keep saving and you can get the inevitable OLED revision in a few years, at which time you can probably find discounts on games to keep costs down and get cheaper microSD express cards. Thanks for watching this review. And if this is content you want to see more of, please leave the video a like and don't forget to subscribe. Additionally, feel free to leave a comment either telling me your battery life that you've done testing, like what games you played and all that, or just tell me what you think of the Switch 2. Do you think it's worth the price? Let me know in the comments below. So again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.